We are live, Pamela.
Okay, good morning. At least good morning over here anyway.
Yeah, good morning, Pamela, and thank you for joining on the podcast
I'm glad to be here.
of Job Talks with HR. Pamela is a talent acquisition professional, and she has been in recruiting for many years. And her experience is on wide range. And today she is here to give the advice to us on how to improvise and get a better chance to get your career ahead and crack interviews. Thank you for being on the podcast, Pamela.
Thank you for having me.
You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, well, like you said, I'm Pamela La Gioia. I have been in the employment or career business for over 20 years. I'm actually not a recruiter, I'm a sourcer. I chose to do this because I want to help people get jobs. That's my main goal. And specifically, I want people to be able to find remote work if that's their choice. So I I began my website in 1999, and since then I've amassed quite a few emails and resumes from job seekers who are looking for work and specifically remote work. But I will say the other thing though is that I'm a parent of three college girls, they're college age, and that has also encouraged me to find ways to help younger people get into the workforce. In fact, I wrote a book for college students it's on Amazon, and it helps them find ways to make money while they're in school, so they don't have to disrupt their studies. So I go both ends, more mid career and then college age students, trying to help them get jobs as well.
Indeed, Pamela, you have an experience of helping college teens as well as the people who are in their career change as well as in the mid career section, correct?
Correct. Yes.
How did you begin your journey? What is your story?
Well, like I said, I'm not exactly a recruiter. I'm a sourcer, which goes hand in hand with recruiting. The sourcing part is very research intensive, which is the part that I like. Um, it's also a way to find candidates who are already employed and may not know that they want another job. So that's the challenge. I like the challenge of finding passive candidates for recruiters and employers who are looking for um, who are looking for candidates to fill hard to fill positions.
Mhm. Correct. Why did you choose to become a sourcer or go hand in hand with recruiting? How did you enter into this domain?
Could you repeat that, please?
I have a question of how did you start into the recruiting domain? How did you enter this domain?
Well, like I said, um, well, actually, I started because when I was younger, I was working in a very toxic environment, and I wanted to work, but I did not want to work for someone else. And I especially did not want to work in an environment where there were a lot of office politics, and just put myself through that stress. So I started researching employment, and that's kind of how I got started. I just started through researching for myself. I started then researching for other people, finding them jobs. And when I did that, employers then began coming to me asking for help filling positions. So that's kind of how I got started.
You started for yourself and then you helped other people get into this field of remote work where they can focus on their college as well as be able to fill their pockets in the meantime, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I have an interesting point of here that what is the hardest part according to you on recruiting?
I think the hardest part is having to go through resumes that are poorly done and trying to determine from a resume that is not done correctly if the person is qualified for a position. There are so many people who have good qualifications or good experience or good skills that don't find work because their resumes are poorly done and they don't show on their resumes how good they are as the other candidate. And that's one of my biggest frustrations. And that's one reason why we at Remote Work Source began also servicing people for resumes. Because if you don't have a good resume, it doesn't really matter how good you are unless you're very connected with someone. It doesn't matter how good you are. Your resume is going to keep you from getting a job. So that's one of the frustrating parts for me, people's resumes and them not willing to invest the time in making a good resume.
Correct. If your first impression is not right, you cannot expect someone to give you a job out of something, correct?
That's correct.
If someone asks you how can I build a resume, or what is the one part of a resume which I should not make a mistake on, what would you advise that person?
What is it? What, repeat that because I didn't quite hear the first part of it. If they asked me, what was that they asked me?
Someone asks you, or a person or a candidate asks you about what is the one thing on my resume which I should not make a mistake on. If that
Ah,
is possible, then you can advise on that.
well, mm, I don't think there really is one thing. That's maybe there's two things. There's two most important things about a resume that candidates need to be extremely in tune with, and that is their summary. The resumes, their professional summary at the top of the resume, and then in their experience section, they need to be focused on including some metrics as well as stop listing duties and list accomplishments. People tend to list what they've done instead of what they accomplished. And that's a big mistake people make on resumes.
Correct. You won't have the numbers on the resume, and you want to show your accomplishments so that a recruiter can see it and quickly understand this is what this person has done in this X amount of period to get the company from here to A to B. Isn't that the thing everyone advises yet no one follows? Do you have a suggestion on that?
Do I have a solution on what was that?
This is a thing that everyone advises every candidate, that you have to use numbers on your resume, you have to put numbers on your resume, you have to put your accomplishments on your resume, yet candidate often forgets this. So is there is there a is there a software, or is there a template which you might have made in your years of experience which people can use to build their resume?
Well, there are a gazillion templates out there for different types of resumes, and they're all well intended and they can be helpful. I think the best thing to do though is to remember that your resume is talking to another employer. It's a one-on-one kind of conversation. So what the problem with templates is that candidates tend to think that one good resume made by a really good template is good enough to send to every employer they want to work for. And a template should be used only as a guide to tell you what kind of information to put where on your resume. But they shouldn't tell you exactly the wording that you put on a resume. That's still up to the candidate. The job seeker needs to use their own words, their own true experience, their own personality in a resume. And more importantly, they need to address every resume to one individual employer they're applying to. So every resume should be tailored to one employer. That doesn't mean you have to rewrite exactly everything, but for one, here's an example. I reviewed a resume this week, and in at the top of their resume they said looking for these positions, and they listed different positions. Well, that's not applying to one job, to one employer, to one company. Okay, that's just throwing that resume out and looking for a catch. And recruiters don't like that. Employers don't like that. Resumes need to be individualized, and templates sometimes make people think that just fill in the blanks and send a resume out, and that's good enough.
Make a specific resume for every job you apply. That is a sound advice that every candidate should follow. I will definitely note that one. If what is the common misunderstanding that you have seen in candidate during an interview?
Oh, I think a common misunderstanding that uh, candidates have is they think that the interview is actually about them. And it's not. It's about, at least not in the first round. The interview is about the recruiter finding out how a candidate can help the company and help the company meet its goals. And I think candidates fail to realize that. They think the person wants to get them, the interviewer wants to get to know them as a person. So they work hard on being very personable. They work hard on certain things that aren't relevant to what the recruiter really wants to know. Because the recruiter is working for the hiring manager who is working for the CEO or whatever. And the CEO wants to know, how are you going to help me if I hire you? How are you going to help me in my bottom line? That's the bottom line of an interview. So it's kind of cold sounding, but it's the reality is that employees and are kind of tools for the bottom line of the company. And candidates don't realize that it doesn't matter if a company has good employee engagement. They need to realize that interviews are about whether you can be of use to a company, and how you can be of use to a company, how long you can be useful to that company, and whether your usefulness will work well with the other people that are useful that are already hired. If you don't let them know that you, here's the thing, the candidates should review those companies, research them thoroughly, and try to understand what the company's needs are, what their pain points are. And in that interview, they need to tailor their answers to try to address those pain points. They need to say in that interview, I'm the person that you need to fix this or help you with this or whatever it is. That's what they need to do. An interview is a sales pitch, and candidates don't often realize that.
An interview is often a sales pitch. I will remember that from now on. I'll remember that.
Yeah, it's that's the bottom line. I mean, it really is. I mean, just like the resume. The resume is and the cover letter, those are both brochures, sales brochures. And then the person gets in for a demo, which is the interview. The interview is a sales demo. And it's the what it is. That's what and it's hard because most of us are not salespeople. I'm not a salesperson. So interviews can be hard for me, and they were hard for me when I was younger. Well, I'm still young, but um, but it's hard to go in there and feel like you're selling yourself. But that is really what you have to do. Just do it in a way, in a consultative way. You don't have to think of yourself as a like a used car salesman. Think of yourself as a consultant going into an interview saying, I have answers that can help you. And make sure that when they ask you questions, your answers reflect how helpful that you can be.
Make your answers as reflective and as helpful for the person in front of you to get a job. Sounds interesting. There is a big gap between a candidate and a great talent. How do you identify the gap, or what do you do to identify a candidate's potential through his resume or her resume?
Well, hopefully they have a resume that truly reflects their abilities and their qualifications. But personally, the qualifications that I think make a good candidate is the person shows on their resume that they're an achiever, and by that I mean that they have a history of going above and beyond what their job description was. And that doesn't really matter what the job was. They if they were a cashier at a store and their job is to ring up customers, what do they do in between time when they're waiting for customers? Do they stand around and wait for customers? And that's their job. Or do they go above and beyond and use that downtime to straighten shelves or help somebody else in their job? Things like that. Those are qualifications of somebody who's an achiever. They like to do things, they like to keep things going. So that's a very important um, qualification. Another one or another characteristic that I would want to see is grit, what we call grit. Does this person have a history of making things happen regardless of their circumstances? For example, I like to say that my daughters have a lot of grit because they are going to full time school, they work full time, they pay their bills, they make things happen, and they get it done no matter what it is. They find a way to get it done. That's grit, and that's an excellent quality for a candidate. Another one is being able to work well with others, and even if you're a remote worker, which is where my concentration is with remote workers, you need to be able to work well with others. um, there is just no I in team, as that's the cliche, I know, but there's just no I in team, and you have to be able to not only be able to help others and listen to others, but you also have to be able to allow others to help you. That's something personally I have a hard time with. um, but it's a skill. If you want, it's a very important skill, because if you don't allow people to help you as much as you're willing to help, then you start coming off as kind of a lone ranger. And companies don't like lone rangers. They want people to be able to be a team. So those are the most important qualities that I can think of.
You mentioned about your concentration on remote working. What are your tips, or what is your advice that a candidate should follow while remote working?
Do you do okay? Are you asking me why a candidate would want to work remote?
Not exactly. I'm asking, if a candidate is working remotely, then what according to you, should be followed to be a part of a team?
Ah, I see. Um, well, thankfully, it's a little easier today in 2022 than it was when I started. So there's kind of no excuse for people not to be part of a team, even if they're working remotely, because we have Zoom, we have Slack, we have so many resources available um, to keep us in touch with each other, to share work with each other, even visually. Um, so my tip is to keep as part of a team is to over communicate if you need to. I actually did write an article. Maybe I can share it with you after the podcast, and you can put it on your site if you choose to. But it's about virtual communication because there's a lot of mistakes that remote workers make when communicating virtually that they need to be aware of because otherwise it will slow work down. It'll impair relationships. So my tip with remote workers is over communicate, be considerate when you communicate with each other, be patient because when you're communicating virtually, sometimes it takes time to get answers. That's something I need to work on myself. It's very easy, for example, myself, if I don't hear an answer back from someone, to assume something's wrong. And that's my mistake, assuming. So it's very important for the person who's waiting to not assume, but it's also important for the person who is supposed to be responding to do things in a timely manner.
Assuming, correct. Being considerate, you mentioned something about being considerate. Can you go deeper on that?
Well, here's another important quality I think in anybody, not just a remote worker or a candidate, and that's having empathy. Um, being able to think about, well, if I don't respond or if I don't give a clear answer or whatever it is, how is that going to affect that person? How is that going to affect our work? Just being, common sense. To me, it's common sense. So, just doing things the way you would want them done to you.
Treat others as you want to be treated. Correct.
Absolutely.
How do you deliver a negative news, Pamela?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
How would you deliver a negative news?
How would I deliver negative news?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Um, Honestly, I'm probably not the best teacher for this, but let's just answer that anyway, because I'm very grateful that the team that I work with with Remote Works Source, they're very patient with me, and I appreciate that. So, um, but I think my first piece of advice when it comes to delivering negative feedback would be to wait before you deliver anything negative until you're not stressed about it, until you're not angry about it, or whatever the situation is. Remove the emotion from what you need to do and what you need to tell someone. I think the second piece of advice for that would be to try to spin the negative into a positive and deliver it in a positive way. For example, if you have a person on your team or a subordinate who is late for meetings all the time or frequently late for meetings, rather than saying, you know what, Sarah, you are constantly late for meetings and that needs to stop. You could spin it in a way such as, Sarah, you know what, when you are in the meeting, you always deliver or give us such interesting feedback. And if you could show up a little bit sooner, I would appreciate it because we miss your feedback. We really need you on this team. So that's kind of putting a more positive spin to it. You're telling that woman or person what you need, and when you're addressing the behavior, and yet you're still giving them some kind of a compliment or positive spin on it. And then the third way of delivering advice, I think, would be to, if especially if there is no way to put it in a positive spin, make sure it's done in private and it's done gently as possible. I'm sure you've seen this new stuff going on with Twitter and the way Elon Musk is handling his employers and his fired employers. Everything's done publicly, and it's horrible. It's very horrible. And I think that's just well, I don't think I'm alone on this, but that's just the wrong way to address people. Do it in private, do it gently, and try to put a positive spin on it.
Yeah, I everyone knows about Twitter right now, how it is going and how is everyone taking it in, employees, founders, everyone around the globe. I hear your point on if someone has to deliver a negative news, one use a positive spin or do it in a private manner so that people who are affected by it are only the person who wants to hear the news, no one else. That is a good way to communicate and maintain relationship with the person as well.
Absolutely. And that's a good point right there. Being able to still maintain a relationship with the person. Delivering negative news, feedback, whatever it is. We're talking really more about feedback because this is a work thing. Delivering negative feedback shouldn't be a relationship killer. It should be there's think about the purpose. What are you trying to achieve when you have to deliver negative feedback to someone? Are you out to get them? No, the purpose is you want something probably to change or to improve. If that's what you want, there's no reason to be hateful about it. There's no reason to embarrass or shame the person about it. And there's no reason to air it in front of everyone else. And there's certainly, like you said, no reason to ruin the relationship over the goal that you have to improve something.
Correct. As as the as problem is something outside and not the person, maybe the person might even not know the problem is existing. If we can address that, the person might come to know and might correct it sooner. As you said, assume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna just briefly tell you. I was working as a younger person. I was working in a company, and we were having a team meeting, and I um, blurted out a suggestion, and the manager looked at me and said, "Shut up." So I did. After the meeting, I asked him to come into the kitchen, the break room, and I said, I apologize for interrupting, but please don't tell me to shut up like that again. I just don't think that's right. His response was, I'm the manager. You don't tell me how to manage. You see how that was the job that made me decide I don't want to work for people. It was a manager and his poor management and not being willing to take feedback and not being willing to take my feedback that was done in private and I thought was done as nicely as possible. So it's a difficult situation, especially when the person doesn't want to hear negative feedback, but you're responsible on your end to do it as professionally, as nicely as possible.
I have experienced that as well. I have seen people when they are giving something and when they are opening themselves up and the person in front is putting a wall and not understanding what they are trying to tell, it it overrides and kills the relationship. As you just experienced or you experience, okay, I don't want to work with this kind of people, and then you started your own remote work source. That is how I have seen candidates who also come to me and say, this is what I experience in my day to day life. I don't want to be around this kind of people. And I say to them oftentimes, did you ever try to tell them this in private? and their response would be, yeah, I have done it, yet there was no improvement in it. At that point, I just tell them, okay, you need to find a different place to be in.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Move on. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is your advice on negotiating salary during an interview?
Um, oh, I think my first piece of advice would, before anybody even tries to go to an interview and negotiate anything, is that they need to research. They need to be informed. You can't do anything properly if you're not informed. So go online, go wherever you need to go, salary.com, whatever it is, and research the going salaries for the position that you're applying for the experience level that you have, for the size of the company, whether it's a private or public company, and so on and so forth. Do your research. The other thing is that now that here's the thing too with remote work though, there's another factor to consider, and that is a company is now will often, they should say, pay someone for the same job and the same experience differently if they live in a different area. For example, a company in New York hiring for a position, excuse me, will pay somebody who lives in Los Angeles a higher starting salary than they will for somebody that lives in rural South Carolina, even though they're doing the same job and they have the same qualifications and so on and so forth. So you have to, for remote workers, that has to be taken into consideration first. And then, of course, I'm speaking for the US here, so everything's different other places. But the other thing is that now the candidates should be aware of laws that are changing regarding salaries as well. Um, Many states do not allow employers to ask about previous salaries. It's illegal to do so. So you better find out if that's legal or illegal before you go into an interview, because if it's not, be aware that they're probably going to ask, what were you making? And that's going to be something they factor into what they offer you. So be prepared for that. And also, um, with some states now having laws that employers have to be transparent with their salaries. While that's helpful for the job seeker, employers are still able to give themselves a lot of wiggle room. For example, they'll put crazy ranges. So they set, for example, starting salary at 50 to $100,000. Well, that really doesn't tell you anything, does it? Okay, what's 52? That's a $50,000 range there. So it's kind of still difficult to know what you should negotiate. But at least it does give you a bottom and a top for that starting position. But if here, it would be helpful too, if you had connections on LinkedIn or somewhere that works for the company that you or the candidate, I mean, is trying to get into, and if you could get some inside information or insider information on how flexible or how well, let's just say how flexible the HR in that company is to negotiating, and maybe if you can even get some salary information. Sometimes that's not even possible and it's just not right to do, but you have to do what you can. You got to research. The bottom line is what I'm saying is you have to research a lot before you go into the interview so that you can get as fair a salary as you can. Then when that's done, be fair and realistic. If you're a software engineer and you're applying for a job at a nonprofit, a small nonprofit company, you can't expect to get the same salary as if you were applying to Google. That's not realistic. So you have to be fair and you have to be realistic. So research, know the laws, know what's changing, know what applies to you or doesn't apply to you, and then be fair.
What you just said in last 5 to 7 minutes is like, I can understand most of the candidates don't know this stuff. I have seen people who said to me, I need to do research. I have done the research. Yet when they sit on the interview table, they just say, okay, give me this salary. I'm okay with it. That is a point of desperation, or what I can say is neediness of a job. I need a job. Okay, just give me whatever you're trying to give me.
I see what you're saying. Yes, you're right about that. Okay, so you're saying when it comes down to it, once they're actually in the job interview, and despite all the research they've done, then what happens, right? So that is really something that is, I mean, what can you can have to, you can give them all the advice in the world, and either they're going to take it or they're not going to take it. Everybody that is looking for a job is going to be somewhat desperate to grab what they can take because they have bills to pay. That's the way it is. But you can't let that desperation, either you're the type of person who doesn't settle or you're the type of person who will settle. And they're probably like that in other aspects of their life as well, if you think about it. They grab what they can, they settle because they don't like to deal with any more discomfort. If you have to put up with some discomfort if you're going to negotiate. You have to take risks if you're going to negotiate. Not the negotiation will not always go your way. And that's simply something that's a factor you have to consider that is a fact of life. It doesn't matter what it is. Salary is one of those things. If you do enough research to find out about that particular company itself, not just salary laws and not just salary trends and everything else, but about that company itself, and talk to people who work there, that will give you a little bit of an edge. And then you have to be willing not to settle.
This is turning out to be a HR advice less and a wisdom advice more, because what you're trying to give advice to candidates or people who are listening to this podcast is that a person who settles in one area of life will settle in every area of life. And that is true. I have seen, I have been there as well, and I have taken myself out of it as well sometimes. I'm trying to learn more things, but yes, this happens. People who settle in one area tend to settle in other areas of life as well. That is a true wisdom that everyone should be noting right now.
That's exactly true.
What are the things a candidate should do yet they don't do? Do you have anything on that?
Okay. I think probably one of the biggest things that candidates should do that they're not doing, and that includes myself when I was a job seeker, is they wait until they're candidates to prepare. Your resume is not something that should be done when you're in a desperate situation. Your resume should be something you maintain throughout your career, a master resume, that is. So even if you're in a great job now, get your resume going, get it done, start documenting everything that you do, and find out while you're in the current job, how did this help? Did it raise sales by how much? Or how did this help? Did it reduce the amount of waste? How much? You know, find out while you're on friendly terms with these companies because you're working with them, what you can about your own work, what you're contributing, how valuable it is, and add that. Keep it like a diary. It's almost like a career diary that you need to be keeping. And that's something most people don't, including, like I said, myself, didn't do. Keep a career diary. When the time comes, which it will for all of us, there's very few of us that stay in one job the entire life. When the time comes, all you have to do then when you pick out your job that you want to try to apply for is based on what you see in the job ad. Then you go through your resume diary and you can say, oh, wow, I did this. They'll love this. They'll love this. They'll love this. And put it on your new resume. So most of us wait until the last minute. So creating a master resume, keeping it updated and reviewed. Um, and the other thing, this is the second thing. There's actually two things, like I just mentioned, the resume. The other thing that we don't seem to remember is in this day and age, social media has a huge impact on whether an employer hires us or not. Even with stellar qualifications, if they go online and see someone use the N word, or someone's drinking and partying a lot, or um, their LinkedIn profile doesn't look anything like the resume. Those are things that are red flags, sometimes big red flags to employers, and they will refuse to hire somebody like that simply because they see you as a liability. So keeping your resume from day one updated, think of it as a career diary, and keeping your online presence clean, very, very clean.
Keeping your online presence clean. This is the new age where everyone is going through LinkedIn and looking for candidates. What is your go-to site for hiring candidates?
Well, like I said, I don't do any hiring, but I know, first of all, that LinkedIn is very popular. It's a very helpful site. There's a ton of job seekers there. There are a ton of recruiters and employers there. It's a great networking site. The thing about LinkedIn, though, is that everybody that people announce when they need a job, and so you're getting a lot of active candidates. Active candidates meaning people who are seriously looking for work. You can't always find the hidden candidates. So Google to me is the best option. If you know how to, if someone knows how to do deep searches within Google, you can find the best resumes for candidates who never thought about looking for a job, and but they can turn out to be the best candidates. You go to industry association websites. For example, if you're looking for a specific type of accountant, um, go to an accounting industry website where these people hang out and where they go to seminars and so on and so forth. So to me, Google is the best place to look because Google will lead you to other great places. LinkedIn's great. I'm not knocking by any means. I hang out there. That's where we met, right? So that's a great place. But I think Google and using resources through searches, through some deep searches in Google, is the best go-to place.
In Google over LinkedIn. Okay. What is the famous or what is the trending site for hiring a candidate in US? As such, in India, it would be as Indeed.com, or there's a site called as Naukri.com. Is there a specific site in US which is US based only?
For finding candidates or finding jobs? I didn't understand.
Both of them. Sometimes candidates go for jobs and sometimes they can go for, sometimes they turn into an HR and they post on that portal as well.
Um, okay, well, finding job, Indeed is an American company, and that's of course a great company. I think it's a great place for job seekers. It's good for recruiters too, especially recruiters that are looking for people in the trades. Electricians or something like that. So that's sometimes not so much white collar work. I don't think Indeed is good for, but I think the Ladders is a good site. That's you can get people in the higher echelon jobs that are looking for work there. I don't really look at a lot of job sites other than my own because I just use Google. So I would say Indeed is an excellent site. It's one of my favorites, just in terms of reading up on career tips and different things like that. And then the ladders, and also uh, Glassdoor. That's what I wanted to say, Glassdoor, because they have such excellent employer reviews. So if you're a candidate, Glassdoor, the ladders, Indeed, and then LinkedIn. Although LinkedIn, I would not use so much for job searching because most of those jobs are actually not even available anymore. So the response rate from employers is very poor on LinkedIn. And I don't know how old those resumes on there are either. I wouldn't even guess. For remote workers, excuse you, you might hear my dog in the background. Let me shut my window. For remote workers, definitely you want to look in the niche sites. For example, like my site, because everyone that comes to my site is looking for a remote job. So anyone you look for there is going to look for a remote position, and you're going to guarantee to find someone who wants remote work. And then just use Google.
The remote work. I believe that entire world is trying to shift to remote work because traveling, health, lifestyle, everything is changing around remote work. Is there anything that you saw specific in this post COVID period which dramatically changed the source of remote work?
Would you repeat the last part? What did I see that dramatically changed remote work?
After COVID or post COVID, did you see any large number of people moving towards remote work or work from home or opting for work from home? Maybe.
Oh, absolutely. If you're talking about the pandemic, yeah, that changed everything. There are people who I can't even remember the statistics now, and they also vary a lot too. But the jump from on-site work to remote work just skyrocketed. Even still, though, even though people are going back on site, the numbers are high for people who want to remote work and companies who are remaining remote or allowing their workers to stay remote. So yeah, it's dramatically changed the remote work. Um, it's changed the way software is made and the kind of software that's being made. It changed the way people are insured. It changed the type of house insurance, home insurance. It changed the way health insurance is done. It changed a lot of things. It just had a big effect on everything having to do with remote.
If on remote a person is not very good with technical skills, yet good with communication, interpersonal skills, or soft skills, maybe, would that candidate be preferred to get a job, or does technical should be the first? Is technical the first thing that should come first?
Well, it sounds like it would be logical that technical skills would be the most important because that's what actually the work is done with, your those skills. The problem with that is that any technical skills can be taught to anybody as long as they are willing and able to learn. That any technical skill can be taught. Soft skills are much harder to teach. So if you already possess them, that's a very big asset. If you are already able to, if you have good written and verbal communication, but you don't know how to work a particular type of software, that's teachable. But teaching someone who has great technical skills to be a good team player, to have good verbal communication, to work well with other, the whole, that's much harder to teach. So I think what's most, and some employers are even leaning in this direction. I think that having the soft skills is probably more important to, unless you're in a situation, for a doctor, for example, of course they need soft skills, but you know what? The bottom line is they need to get somebody better. And if they don't have soft skills, they still can do their job. You just don't like them. But when you're working with somebody closely on a day-to-day basis, even if virtually and online, whatever, you still need to have those soft skills, or things just don't get done. Things, you have to have cooperation. You have to No matter what your technical skills are, if you can't cooperate with people, communicate with people, just get along with them, the job's not going to get done.
So in short, a technical skill is right prime, yet if a person is not able to communicate clearly, ideas cannot be shared, nor can the technical skill be useful anywhere.
Exactly.
Pamela, we are winding up the podcast. What is the one final advice would you give a candidate when he's searching for a job? One final advice.
The one, what was that?
One final advice would that you would give a candidate when searching for a job.
I would say that candidates need to stay in touch with hiring trends because even if they have a great resume or this whatever it is they're doing, if they're not, hiring trends are constantly changing. That's what makes them the trends. And even in, it doesn't matter what country someone is in, they've got to stay in touch with those. And one of the biggest trends that they need to be in touch with now is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is what keeps your resume from coming to a recruiter, through the ATS, the applicant software, tracking software. That's extremely important. And I'm going to just tell you briefly. Last week, I worked on a resume, and the person that I was working on it with wanted to keep a part of the resume and didn't change. Well, didn't want it changed because they liked it. And she was a neighboring country to the U.S. And I explained to her that leaving it like the way it was going to prevent it from getting through the ATS. So she said, well, she didn't know what an ATS was. And then I explained it to her. And she said, well, I don't think we use those in our country anyway. As you know, I'm sure from being in this kind of business, an ATS is a software that is used globally in every company that's of any size, probably bigger than 50 people. They use an applicant tracking software. So that's an example of being in touch with what is going on and how things move in the employment or the hiring business. What happens to my resume when it leaves my desk? I need to know that. I can't just sit there and keep throwing out resumes and resumes and resumes and then sitting here saying, I don't understand. Why am I not getting hired? You need to know what's going on in the world, at least in the hiring world around you. So that is my biggest piece of advice. It's just to research, be aware, be in the know, um, just know what you're doing. And the other thing I think is that, that's where mistakes come from, is just not knowing what's going on and also not knowing what's going on with yourself. This sounds kind of crazy, but like I said, keeping track of your master resume, your master diary, whatever you want to call it, be in the know of what's going on with your own career so that you're able to use it to better your career in the future.
Got it. Extremely useful, and keep a track of your resume wherever when you start your career so that you don't have to lose the track of what are your accomplishments. And once you have an accomplishment and when the time comes, and the time will come to change, you are ready, you are prepared. That is a good sound advice.
Exactly, exactly.
Why other thing What are the other channels people can find you, Pamela, apart from LinkedIn?
Where can they find me? They can find me at www.remoteworksource.com.
Mhm. Okay. Any other places you want to any other places you want to get candidates from, or any other places you want people to connect you with?
We have a Facebook page and we have a LinkedIn company page. I also have well, the website, like I just told you, and I think it would be helpful to people that are interested in the topic that we just talked about if they went to the website and read the articles that I have on interviewing, on resumes, on references, on cover letters. I mean, the whole gamut. So my advice is for them to start at remoteworksource.com, and we do resumes. We do completely rewrite them for them, or we can do free resume reviews as well. So we have a lot of services to offer there. So start with the website, www.remoteworksource.com.
What are your plans, if I may know? What are your pricing plans?
My private plans, is that what you said?
Pricing plans of
Oh,
remote work.
well, we just plan to continue to grow and offer more services to job seekers. And we're very proud of the fact that we are free. We don't charge memberships for people just to look at jobs or to look at companies. We have over 4,000 companies on our website that they can look at that hire remote workers. Um, and that's on top of the job board that we have that is remote only. We don't put anything in there with high traveling or we don't do hybrid work. Everything is remote work. And we do as much as we can for around the globe. I mean, we have positions in companies that hire just in India. We have companies for certain countries in Africa, in the UK, you name it. So we really want to be broad and we want to be global and to be the best resource for job seekers that we can.
Got it, Pamela. I will definitely link your website, your LinkedIn ID, company ID, as well as the article which you just said. Can you share it with me so that I can link it on the podcast as well?
You want me to share with you in an email or well, how would you like me to do that?
Your choice. You can ping me up on LinkedIn or you can just share it on the email, however it is convenient to you.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining the podcast. Thank you, Pamela, for joining the podcast. It
Thank you so
was
much
a
for
great
having
experience as well. And would we would be enjoying the podcast if the time was right. And most of all, Pamela, you can always jump on the podcast whenever you want to share your wisdom with the people and help the candidates. As I saw that you have
Thank you.
a vast experience as well as the the experience of remote work, which is tuning entire country or entire world around. So yeah, you can be on the podcast very soon as well.
Okay, perhaps we'll be meeting again then.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Pamela, for on the podcast.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah.